The knock came just before midnight. 3 soft taps, too polite for a stranger, too deliberate for an accident. My chest tightened. Nobody ever visited me this late, not out here on Willow Creek Road. When I opened the door, I saw my brother, of all people, standing in the porch light, rain dripping from his hair. "Hey, sis," he said, smiling like a man who'd rehearsed it. "You're alone now, right? No husband, no kids?" I didn't answer. "Good," he said. "Then it's time to talk about Mom's house. Before we start, make sure you subscribe. You don't want to miss how this ends. The thing about Betrayal is it never arrives with a shout. It knocks softly, pretending to care." My name is Amber Sullivan, 34, web copywriter, owner of a small place halfway between Austin and nowhere. I bought this house 2 years ago after my mother passed. She'd left it to me, her quiet daughter, the one who didn't argue, the one who never borrowed a dime. My brother Evan called it unfair. My father called it temporary. I called it home. The night he showed up, I hadn't spoken to either of them in nearly 5 years. The last time, Dad told me I was playing adult instead of being one because I'd refused to co-sign a loan for his failing car dealership. I remember hanging up, shaking but proud. That was the first boundary I'd ever built. Now Evan was back, wearing my father's old confidence like a hand-me-down suit. "Mom wanted it for the family," he said. "Mom wanted peace," I replied. "And you both gave her ulcers." He chuckled, a sound like gravel. "Come on, Amber, you don't even use half this space. It's not like you're raising anyone here." I should have slammed the door. Instead, I just looked at him, the same face that used to smirk when Dad belittled me at dinner. "You think you can walk back in after years and start claiming walls?" He didn't answer, just stared past me into the house, into the life I'd built without them. When I finally closed the door, my hands were trembling, not from fear, but from the realization that something had started. That knock wasn't a visit. It was a warning. That night I sat at my kitchen table staring at the faint ring marks Mom's old teacups had left behind. I whispered to the empty air, "They won't take this." But deep down, I knew they'd try. People talk about family like it's a shelter. Mine was a storm with my name written on it. Growing up in Plano, Texas, I learned early that silence was safer than honesty. My father, Mark Sullivan, sold used cars and pride in equal measure. He believed discipline was the same as love, and that the volume of his voice proved both. My mother, Elaine, was the kind of woman who ironed tablecloths for guests we never had and smiled through every bruise of a sentence he threw. And then there was Evan, 2 years older, golden, spoiled, untouchable. He could crash Dad's car and still get dessert. I could bring home straight A's and get asked why it wasn't A+. At dinner, they talked. I listened. Dad about sales numbers, Evan about football, me? I passed the mashed potatoes and pretended the noise didn't drown me. One night, when I was 17, I told them I wanted to study interior design. Dad didn't even look up from his plate. "Decorating? You think that's a career?" "It's not decorating," I said quietly. "It's design." "Same thing," Evan added, laughing. "Maybe you can paint my office someday." I remember that laughter more than any slap. It was soft, practiced, the sound of small cruelties passing as family humor. Mom tried to smooth it over with her usual line. "They're teasing because they care." But caring, in my family, always meant shrinking me down until I fit their comfort zone. So I left. Community college, 2 part-time jobs, a basement apartment that smelled like mildew, but belonged to nobody but me. They didn't call for months. When they finally did, it was because Evan needed help formatting his resume. I did it, of course. Back then, I still believed effort could buy affection. When Mom got sick, breast cancer, stage 3, I came home every weekend to drive her to chemo while Dad couldn't get away from work. He'd text, "Thanks, kid," like I was a temp filling in. Evan sent flowers, cheap ones, probably from a gas station. Mom used to squeeze my hand and whisper, "You're stronger than you think, Amber." I didn't believe her then. I do now. She passed 2 years later. The will reading was quiet until Dad heard my name beside the words, "The house on Willow Creek." His jaw tightened. "That must be a mistake," he said. "It's not," the lawyer replied. He didn't yell that day. He just left and took Evan with him. I thought that silence meant peace. But standing in my kitchen now, years later, with Evan's knock still echoing in my ears, I realized it was just the eye of a storm I'd been pretending was over. It started with small things, voicemails that began with, "Just checking in," and ended with, "You shouldn't live there alone." The kind of concern that felt like fingerprints on my throat. A week after that midnight knock, I found a letter in my mailbox. No stamp, no return address. Just my name scrawled in my father's impatient handwriting. "Amber, this family has been through enough distance. Your mother wouldn't want it like this. We should meet, Sunday. Bring the deed. Love, Dad." The word love looked like an afterthought, added just before sealing the envelope. I sat at the table with my coffee going cold, reading the note again and again. Part of me almost wanted to believe him, believe that maybe guilt had finally learned how to speak. But guilt was never my father's language. Control was. When Sunday came, I didn't go. Instead, they came to me. Their old silver sedan crunched up the gravel driveway around noon. Evan got out first, all designer shades and fake smiles. Dad followed, slower, heavier, a man still convinced the world owed him an apology. "Amber," he said, arms wide like a sermon. "You look tired. Are you eating right out here?" I didn't move from the porch. "What do you want?" Evan leaned against the railing. "We just want to talk about the future. This house, it's a family property, right? Mom built a life here. We thought maybe it's time we all—" I cut him off. "We? You didn't even visit her the last 6 months." Dad's face hardened. "Watch your tone, young lady." That phrase, "young lady," hit like static from an old wound. He'd used it every time I dared to disagree, as if adulthood could be revoked at will. "This house is mine," I said, slow and steady. "Mom left it to me because she wanted at least one person in this family to have a home without strings." Evan smiled, that same smirk from childhood. "You always make everything dramatic. We're just offering stability. You know how hard maintenance can be for a single woman. Stop." My voice came sharper than I meant. "You're not moving in." "Not now, not ever," Dad sighed, like he was disappointed in a student who failed a test. "You'll regret this attitude, Amber. We're family. We take care of each other." I stared at him, remembering every time taking care meant keeping quiet, agreeing, surrendering. When they finally left, my front door felt heavier than usual when I locked it. Later that night, I checked my security cameras, an old habit from when I first moved in. I noticed something strange. The red light on the backyard camera wasn't blinking. The power cord had been cut. They hadn't just come to talk. They'd come to measure the walls. Betrayal doesn't announce itself. It creeps in through the back door and pretends it belongs there. The first time I realized they were inside my house, it wasn't fear I felt. It was déjà vu. It happened on a Thursday morning in April. The rain had stopped just long enough to make the air heavy with mud and lilac. I was working in my little home office, freelance copywriting for a furniture brand, when the motion alert on my phone chimed. Backyard camera activated. The feed flickered. For a moment, I saw nothing but gray light through the rain-streaked lens. Then a familiar figure appeared. Evan, holding a crowbar, wearing gloves. Behind him, Dad in that same tan windbreaker he'd worn since forever, muttering something I couldn't hear. I froze. My first thought wasn't even call the police. It was, of course. Of course they wouldn't take no for an answer. My hands shook as I dialed Evan's number. He picked up on the second ring, sounding annoyingly casual. "Hey, sis. You're in my backyard. We're not breaking in. We're just checking the place. You weren't answering calls. You cut my camera cable. It's family property, Amber. You don't get to hide behind electronics." The call ended with a click. I stared at my reflection in the phone screen, pale and furious, and realized something sharp. This wasn't about a house. It never was. It was about control. my father's favorite inheritance. By the time I got home that afternoon, their car was in the driveway. My living room curtains were open, my mother's old photo frames replaced by theirs. My couch had been moved, my workspace turned into a guest room. When I stepped inside, Dad was standing near the mantel, inspecting the house like a buyer at an open house. "You weren't supposed to be back so soon," he said. "Not surprised, not ashamed. You broke in. Don't dramatize it." "We're reclaiming what's ours," I laughed, just once, dry and brittle. "You threw me out of your house at 21 because I wouldn't co-sign your loan. This is mine. Mom left it to me." Evan crossed his arms. "And you think a piece of paper makes you better than us?" For the first time, I looked at them and saw not family, but two squatters dressed in entitlement. I walked to the coffee table, set down my phone, and hit play. The screen lit up with footage. Evan prying open the back door, Dad cutting the power line. "That's breaking and entering," I said. "And the police will love this." Dad's jaw tensed. "You wouldn't dare," I smiled. "Watch me." It wasn't loud. It wasn't dramatic. But that single call to 911 was the quietest act of rebellion I'd ever committed, and it was the one that finally set me free. Justice doesn't always roar. Sometimes it knocks politely, clipboard in hand, and asks for names. The sirens reached before the flashing lights did. Low, steady, almost embarrassed to disturb the quiet of Willow Creek Road. Two patrol cars pulled into the driveway. Dad and Evan stepped outside before the officers even reached the porch, rehearsing calm faces like bad actors at an audition. I stayed behind the screen door, phone in hand, recording. "Ma'am, you the homeowner?" one officer asked when he saw me. "Yes," I said. "Amber Sullivan. I have the deed and the footage." Evan spoke over me, voice bright with false charm. "We're her family." "There's been a misunderstanding." The officer turned to him. "You live here?" "No," I said before he could lie. "They forced the lock." "It's all on video." I showed the footage, the crowbar, the broken latch, the boxes. The air seemed to thin as the officer watched. When the clip ended, he looked at them and said evenly, "You've got 30 minutes to pack your things and leave the property." Dad's face went red, then pale. "This is ridiculous. This is our house." The officer didn't blink. "Sir, unless your name is on that deed, it isn't." Evan tried to protest, but his voice cracked halfway through the word family. I stood silent, watching them gather their clothes, their photo frames, their entitlement. My hands didn't shake this time. I didn't cry. The anger that used to live under my ribs had burned itself into something colder, clearer, like glass. When Dad passed by me carrying a box, he muttered, "You'll regret humiliating your own blood." I met his eyes. "You did that all by yourself." Outside, the rain began again, soft, steady, tapping on the roof like applause. One of the officers handed me a card. "File for a restraining order. They won't come back after that." "Thank you," I said. As they drove off, the house felt still. Not empty, just still. For years, silence had meant danger. That night, it finally meant safety. Later, when I mopped the mud from the floor, I found a photograph under the coffee table. Mom in the backyard, sunlight in her hair, smiling at something out of frame. I sat on the floor, holding it, and for the first time in a long while, I spoke to her out loud. "You were right." "Mom, I was stronger than I thought." The police called 2 weeks later. The case was clear. Breaking and entering, trespassing, property damage. Dad and Evan pled guilty, accepted probation. The restraining order was granted, 500 feet of peace. I printed the police report and slipped it into the same folder as Mom's will. Not as a trophy, just as proof that survival can, eventually, have paperwork. The next morning, the sun poured through the kitchen window. The air smelled like rain and coffee. I made breakfast in silence, feeling something I hadn't in years. Freedom. Freedom doesn't arrive with trumpets. It slips in quietly, like sunlight through an unlatched window. 3 months have passed since the night the police took my father's statement on the porch. The grass has grown back where their car tires once sank into the mud. The locks have been changed. The silence once heavy now feels like company. Most mornings I wake early, habit, not fear, and sit by the kitchen window with coffee and my laptop. My work has picked up. A few small businesses found me through referrals, and suddenly, I'm booked solid through fall. It's the first time in years that my bills, my time, and my peace all belong to me. Sometimes, though, I still hear echoes. Dad's voice, low and commanding. Evan's laughter, that smug lilt that used to shrink me without a word. They visit like ghosts, not to haunt, but to remind me what I escaped. The restraining order expires next year. I keep the paperwork in the top drawer of my desk, next to the house deed and my mother's old silver locket. Inside it, there's a tiny folded note in her handwriting. Keep your heart clean, but your boundaries firm. She must have written it long before she passed. I never saw it until I cleaned out her jewelry box last month. Funny how mothers prepare you for storms you don't know are coming. This afternoon, I was painting the porch railing when my phone buzzed with an unknown number. Against my better judgment, I answered, "Amber? Who is this?" "It's Dad." For a second, the sound of his voice turned me 16 again, small, anxious, desperate to say the right thing. Then I remembered the rain, the crowbar, the broken lock. "What do you want?" I asked. "We're selling the dealership." "I thought maybe you'd like to—" "No." Silence. Then softer. "I just wanted to say I'm sorry." "You're not," I said. "You're nostalgic." He sighed, the kind of sigh that used to make me apologize just to end the tension. This time, I let it hang there. "Take care, Dad," I said and ended the call. I didn't cry. I didn't tremble. I just went back to painting. The air smelled of rain again, faint, cleansing. When the last brushstroke dried, I stood back and looked at the house. Its chipped shutters, the creaking porch, the wild garden that refused to die. It wasn't perfect, but it was mine. Every corner of it earned, every scar understood. I sat on the porch steps, twilight spreading over Willow Creek, and whispered into the breeze, "Freedom can be lonely, Mom, but it's still freedom." The wind stirred the trees like a quiet answer, and for the first time in my life, I didn't need anyone to tell me I'd done the right thing. I already knew. If you've ever rebuilt yourself from what your family broke, subscribe. You'll understand what comes next.